ambitious and challenging salvage job to date. Pretty much everything on it that could be knackered is knackered. So I'm obviously very excited about getting cracking. Now, this bike has been written off by a local bike shop, by which I mean they have declared it beyond economic salvageability, which is true. There is no way that the time and money necessary to get this thing running would be justifiable economically, because when it's finished, the thing's not going to have any financial value. However, it has huge sentimental value, and obviously I don't like any bikes going to landfill, so I've taken on the challenge.
So what we have here is a Dawes StreetWise. I would estimate from probably, well, definitely from the 90s. I've yet to work out exactly which year, but this belongs to a business associate of mine and a fellow cyclist. And it's something that is worn out through not neglect, but quite the opposite. It has been very well loved and very well used. So as far as he's concerned, he's prepared to do anything to keep it running. And we've decided to turn this into a bit of a charity initiative, because obviously it's going to cost more in terms of time and money to get this thing running than the thing is worth. So we've decided to donate that value to his favourite charity, which is called Hugs. It is a Ugandan education project. There'll be more about that in the description. Now, the main moral to this story is that there's no such thing as a bike that deserves to go to landfill. Even the worst wrecks, and there are worse than this, have a charitable angle to them. If a bike is completely unrideable, which this one currently is, there are still hundreds of little parts on it that can be stripped by the right people, and there are many charities that do this, to be put onto other bikes and refurbished and either sent out to countries or communities that need them, or indeed sold on, as we saw with the Specialized that I donated to the shop in Chiltern in my last video. In this case, this bike is going to be going back to its owner, hopefully immaculate by the time I've finished with it, but obviously we'll have raised some money in the process. Anyway, there's plenty on this bike that's of real value. Obviously the gears are completely snarled up and the chain's fully stretched, so I think the cassette and chain at least are going to need to be binned. The wheels I think are sound. There's a few crooked spokes, but they're fundamentally quite straight. The mud guards will have to be binned. This is a Swiss-made rack, which, although scruffy, is pretty solid and decent for luggage carrying. The frame is knackered, but it can be used because this is Reynolds 501, which is steel tubing, pretty much indestructible. The odd dent and scuff might not look nice, but they certainly don't affect its usability. That said, we do need to be careful that clearly water will have got inside from where it's been open to the elements with this internal cable routing, so we need to look at that, maybe spray some frame saver down in there. And also, we do have a problem where the head tube has slightly stretched. This cup is just sitting loose in there. So, but I think that can be fixed with a particular Loctite product. So we're going to experiment with that. But generally, I think the frame will clean up. The brakes are okay, although the blocks are completely worn out. It's going to need complete recabling throughout, and obviously a new saddle. The gentleman has requested a vegan saddle, so we're going to use we're going to get one of the microfiber turbo reissues, which look cool and also are obviously preferable to many people than the original leather covering. Things like these early SRAM grip shifts, while certainly not favoured or loved by mechanics or riders, if it's still working, I'm inclined to keep it. I mean, this thing's gone all sticky and horrible, but it does still run. So I'm going to clean it up and salvage it. Same with things like the brake levers. In fact, they've got mismatched shifters, one SRAM, one Shimano. It's actually got new tyres on it, or newish, Schwalbe, both front and rear, not a matching pair, but I'm disinclined to get rid of these. Although they don't match, this isn't going to be a beauty rebuild, this is going to be very much a utility rebuild, so I think we'll keep those. Likewise, the rack, not pretty but solid. We are going to treat this bike to some, I think, SKS thermoplastic mudguards. This one's completely dead, shattered, and the front one has obviously vanished into the earth somewhere. So things like a nice bottle cage, I'm thinking maybe in a nice teal colour to bring out the sort of early 90s vibe, and some cable housing to match. But apart from a few aesthetic touches, I'm not going to try and make this beautiful. I'm just going to make it usable so that its rider can get hundreds and hundreds more miles out of it, which was always his intention.
Now, there are loads of do's and don'ts on the internet about jet washing bikes, especially if you're dealing with things like sealed bearings or expensive suspension, bushings, pivots and seals. Obviously, if you're going to take the bike apart and put every last nut and bolt in a bucket, then of course you can gun at it with one of these like you're taking barnacles off an oil rig, and that's exactly what I'm about to do.
Now, if I'm going to be honest, for the first time in my life, since this is for charity, I must admit that all that hyperbole about this being the worst wreck and all the rest of it isn't entirely true. Yes, it is a write-off, but it's a write-off for a sort of accumulation of lots and lots of little reasons rather than any one big catastrophic and unfixable one. So what that means is it is fixable, and we're not going to have to do any welding or buy any significant new parts for it. It's just going to be a lot of effort with what we've got. But I have seen worse. Here's the first significant problem. The expander wedge from this quill stem is completely stuck inside the steerer of the fork. Now, it's not insurmountable. All I have to do is get rid of this through bolt and take the stem out with the expander still inside, and then whack it out from inside using some kind of dowel and a hammer. So that's what we're going to have to do. At least it's likely that the expander is also made of steel. They almost always are, especially on the cheaper stems, which means there's not going to be any bimetallic corrosion, or galvanic corrosion, which I've talked about in previous videos. All that's going to have happened is it's wedged in there with probably a bit of rust. So nothing that a hammer and a good whack won't fix. Another potential moment of truth here. See if this seat post, which is aluminium, moves in this frame, which is steel. If it doesn't, we really do have a problem. Oh, it does. There we go. See, not as bad as it could have been. There's always going to be a few bolts that round out because they've had it. And thankfully there's this rather primitive tool. Don't even know what it's called, but it looks like it was invented by apes before the time of man. Works though. Now this headset really is rotten. I'd be very surprised if the bearings inside are any good at all, given that the cups are rattling around in the head tube. That's probably going to be the biggest challenge out of this whole build, but I will not let it beat me. Let's see what we can find. Ooh. Top cage is pretty much intact. There's even still some grease in it. Bottom one, however, I'm not so full of faith. Yeah, that's all right. That'll come up all right with the night in the vinegar. And the top race is not pitted or corroded. Bit of a clean up and that will live another day. Let's have a look at the bottom. Well, the cup fell out straight away. That's not meant to happen, sports fans. That's meant to be pressed in, not rattling around to that extent. Is there even a set of bearings in there? Right, you and I are gonna find out together. Oh, yeah. Right, the bearings don't look too bad. And the bottom race looks all right too. So really the biggest challenge is going to be this flared head tube here. But because it's 501 steel, it should be, well, at least shimmable, if not reformable, without any structural weakening. So I'm not entirely worried. I think a bit of Loctite 609 in there, and we should be laughing. the state of this. One of the most hated pieces of gear shifting technology, but this thing is still working. And also it has some sort of slight historical interest in the fact that it's the first piece of technology that SRAM ever invented before I think the company was even called SRAM. It just used to be branded Grip Shift back in the 90s. So there you go, bit of history. We'll keep that alive. And here's the obligatory pile of grimy, rusty bits. If you're looking at this thinking I could stare at this all day, then you are subscribed to the correct YouTube channel. I'm going to have a lot of fun with this. I don't know about you, but I think this is the best bit of any bike stripped down. It's the vinegar on all the rusty bits. Because in 24 hours time, these will all be good as new. Lovely. 24 hours later. I actually asked myself the question today, do my subscribers really want to watch me scrubbing the rust and grease off a load of old nuts and bolts? And then I remembered who we are. So let's give the people what they want. So here's the money shot, strictly for the heads. Another evening of elbow grease with some very satisfying results. Having got all the generations of filth off of these parts and really inspected them closely, I've come to the conclusion that this bike really wasn't as bad as it looked. Certainly this is all good quality kit. Even these rather cheap plastic bodied brake levers that I complained about when I first saw them. Yeah, they're not really made to last, but then on the other hand, they have lasted. They will go back together and they will work for years to come. The chain set, it's one of Shimano's more basic units with the steel chainring sort of stamped onto the aluminium spider. They're not removable or replaceable, but then they last long enough and they're still working today, so no complaints there. The derailleur's perfectly functional, will still continue to work for many more years, albeit scratched and scuffed and de-chromed. These things, when lubricated and put back together, will be fantastic. I like the bars and stem. They're a decent lightweight aluminium, and with a bit of polish, their sort of black finish is going to look weathered but cool. Likewise the seat post, and can't complain about these brakes. They are later generation Shimano cantilevers, I'd say from the mid to even late 90s. And I can't fault them really. They're light, they're easy to set up, and once they've been cleaned, as you can see, they're good as new. So a very satisfying and worthwhile evening of salvage. I always say, whenever possible, it's far preferable to preserve battle-scarred patina than to strip and repaint, because if you strip and repaint, you might as well just have a new bike. And that's not just a laziness decision, that's an aesthetic choice which I'll always try and stick to. Before any kind of restoration or preservation takes place, there's no substitute for a good going over with WD-40 just to get sticky stuff off, road grime, patches of rust, all the rest of it, to sort of get it down to the surface of the paint before you can really start with the polishes. So that's what I'm going to do first. Right, with the WD-40 done, the next step is this teacup colour restorer, and then once that's dried and buffed off, then I'll finish with the Spray.bike top wax. Obviously it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to look quite nice when it's done. No filming and camera work in the world is going to make this process look interesting, so I'm just going to get cracking for the evening and then show you the after.
Here's an unexpected delight, which is going to add a bit of time onto the build. I took out this quick release skewer just to give it a bit of a de-rust, and look, sheared axle. The cones came with it. So kudos to the rider for clearly not knowing his own strength and managing to snap a front axle. God knows how much power you need to exert on one of these wheels to do that. But anyway, these things are easy enough to find. So back to eBay we go for a hollow replacement axle. Now, this original 7-speed Hyperglide cassette has actually cleaned up really nicely and does look good as new. But we're not going to know if it's actually usable until the test ride, because the original chain was so badly stretched that it's entirely possible that it's done invisible damage to the gaps between the teeth, which would make it jump all over the place. So hopefully we'll have saved ourselves a few quid and we'll be able to get away with using this one. But we'll find out when the bike is complete. The innards of this hub aren't too bad. There's plenty of, not fresh, but half decent grease still inside, and the bearing surfaces still run smoothly enough. So hopefully a clean-up and a replacement axle will be all this needs. This hub is from the 90s. It's a Shimano Acera X. But believe it or not, Shimano hubs to this very day still use loose ball bearings and a cup and cone assembly. I think they're probably the only major manufacturer to still do this. Certainly most of my modern bikes have got Hope, Chris King, Mavic, all different manufacturers' hubs with sealed cartridge bearings, which you just chuck away and replace when they die. These, however, do still have their fans. I personally actually quite like them because they're quite therapeutic to take apart, clean up and put back together. Takes time, but you can make them last a lifetime, and this one, apart from its snapped axle, which I'm having to replace, is going to last a lifetime. Postman's been surely the most magical time of the year. He has brought a 90s purple bottle cage, a brand new chain, which of course was necessary, some new pedals, which were not essential, but I think necessary given that the plastic ones on the bike, yeah, they work, but they were horrible. What else? The axle for the front hub we've talked about, a set of thermoplastic, chromoplastic mud guards, the best ones I could find. We didn't get the vegan turbo in the end. We got same brand, but this one I think looks a little bit more modern. In fact, it's got a bit of a look of a flight about it. But such a good price, I couldn't resist. So this is a very cool saddle. Set of cables, and also the postman has brought me this rather menacing looking chisel, the use for which is about to become apparent. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is headset night. Now, this is the underside of the head tube. I flipped the frame upside down, and this is the bottom cup, which is supposed to be pressed into here under some not inconsiderable pressure. It is not supposed to drop in and waggle about. So we need to fix this. Thankfully, I have nicked an idea from a fellow YouTuber called Retro Bike Stuff, hence the chisel. So without further ado, let me demonstrate Retro Bike Stuff's chisel method, which on its own worked very well for him. It's probably not going to work on its own for this. I do think I need to combine it with some Loctite 609. The reason being that this is so loose that even if, when you whack divots all around the inside of the inner diameter with a chisel, yes, what that does is it makes irregular, it sort of throws up bits of metal to create some purchase for it to grip. That alone isn't going to work because it's so loose. But hopefully the Loctite, which expands in an anaerobic environment, will finish the job. So there's only one way to find out, and that's to do it. Well, I can confirm that whacking a chisel around the inside has made a difference.
the man whose idea I stole was right. It's roughed up the surface of the metal inside and taken out some of the play, but it's still loose. So I'm hoping that the final ingredient will be this stuff. Now I've no idea how toxic this is, so I'm going to put some nitrile gloves on and then see how we go. Well, I've dropped as much of the Loctite 609 as I could into the gap and pressed the thing in. I say pressed, it just dropped straight in. And now I'm just going to let it sit here for 24 hours, let gravity do its job. Hopefully this fabled expansion is going to happen. And then when I flip the frame the right way up, if this cup doesn't drop out, then that's all we need. Whomp, there it is. Well, that headset didn't look salvageable, but as you can see, it's probably got another 3 decades in it, easy. A cheap and very cool finishing touch that I nicked off Instagram is this paracord chainstay protector. You can see the one I made for my S-Works single speed here. This is an idea I nicked off Zetland Cycles. I recommend Zetland Cycles on Instagram. Some really beautiful builds. And of course, you can't really call yourself an outdoor survivor unless you've got a paracord weaving kit. And of course, here's mine. So I'm going to use the same gauge and colour as I used on the S-Works on this Dawes. I think it is going to look really cool with the colour scheme, and I think this piece actually, obviously without the Mexican skull, is going to be just the right length. So in we go. Now do not start expecting paracord weaving expertise on this channel, especially when there's so many amazing ones. I think Weavers of Eternity is one I'm subscribed to. There's loads if you're as nerdy as I am. But this is quite easy. All you do is give yourself about that much loose and sort of hide it behind the chainstay and then wrap round it nice and tight so that it's hidden. And then you'll see how I nip it off at the other end when we get there. Another word of caution if you're going to try making one of these paracord chainstay protectors, bear in mind what style of bike and what style of tyres you're going to run. This street bike with plenty of tyre clearance in here is not going to be a problem, but as you may have noticed on my S-Works single speed, the clearance between the knobbly tyres and the inside of the rather bulky paracord at this point is less than 1 millimetre. Now obviously I keep my wheels nice and straight and I don't use that bike for anything particularly hardcore, so it's not a problem, but it would be on many mountain bikes. So it's just something to bear in mind before you embark on this project. Right, to finish off at this end, it's very much the same as how we started. We have to thread it under itself at the back here, on the inside of the chainstay, so you can't see it, and then pull it nice and tight. And then with the loose end that you get, you'll see how I'm going to cut it, sear it with a turbo flame, and just squish it down with a marlin spike, the melted end, so that it doesn't feed itself back through and undo. First cut off the excess. Very, very simple knot. Probably feed it under 2 of its own loops. Like that. Hide the knot, yank it tight. Give it a good old scorch with the turbo flame till it's really bubbling, and then squish it down with the knurled ring on your marlin spike while it's still melted. That is not going anywhere. Now, I don't like to brag too much about my own genius, certainly not more than once per video, but this I think is a tasty little trick. These rather sort of OAP style sit up and beg handlebars can, with absolutely no cost, be turned into something very cool. Watch this. There you go, whip them out, flip them upside down, and suddenly you've got these very contemporary, very cool sort of cafe racer style shallow drops, which all the Instagram kids would pay you a fortune for. This is going to make the bike ride more nicely and certainly look very cool indeed. Right, well, I did say this thing wasn't going to be beautiful, and it's not going to win any pageants, but actually there is an industrial utilitarian beauty. And also what you can't see on film, but what you can really feel when you pick it up and ride it, is it just feels bomb-proof. You really could cross continents on this, and I'm sure it has got many, many more years and miles in it. Obviously, for the aforementioned continent crossing, you're going to need luggage capabilities, which I think is our last challenge. This very cool rack is entirely functional but very scruffy, and I think what that's going to require is digging out my old friend the air compressor for a bit of DIY sandblasting. So definitely stay tuned for that. This could be insane. Right, here we are in the Atelier Galibier in the fashionable part of town, ready for the emotional handover. If you want to see two middle-aged dads choking back tears over an old bike, then today's the day. So once again, yet another bike that I'm reluctant to hand over, but hand over I must. What do you think?
Oh, it's just amazing. Can't believe it. It was on its way to the. It was on the way to the tip, wasn't it, when I first saw it?
Well, the moral of that story is no bike deserves to go to the tip. There are, of course, some exceptions, but this was not one. What do you think of the Cafe Racer handlebars?
I know. They're the same handlebars, aren't they?
Same handlebar, but transformed from a pensioner's bike to an Instagram bike in one flip.
I'm nearly a pensioner, so
Even still, you could sell this for a fortune now. Yeah, you can see where all the dents and scratches are kind of still. There's evidence that they were there.
Yeah. Well, I'm 30 years ago. I was inventing it.
Yeah, well, so was
I
I.
had a bit of hair, and also I had hair when I bought it.
So let's talk about the money we've raised. So now, obviously, in our day jobs, Chris runs a law firm, I run a PR firm. We're both accustomed to running up huge bills by the hour. And on that basis, I have presented Chris with an enormous bill for my services. And it's worth talking about where that money's going to go.
Well, Hugs Charity that I'm trustee of is an amazing organisation. We've got 7 schools that we've helped establish across Uganda, with one also in Rwanda. And so the plan is that we will fund purchasing a number of little trikes to have, probably one of the schools there, Good Shepherd in Fort Portal has it's a school for kids with disability. Very rare in Uganda that kids with any form of disability of any level get much in the way of education because of that, the stigma that goes with disability in Uganda. So get some trikes, let the kids learn to ride in the on the play area or on the hard ground, and that'll be perfect. Next generation of Ugandan champions could come from a school in Fort Portal.
Nice.
It'll be very nice.
Well, we've calculated that the money we've raised just from the build of this bike will be enough to buy at least one of these specially adapted trikes, and also a new bike for a teacher in Rwanda, I believe.
Yeah, I reckon so.
Looking at that.
Yeah.
So
I suppose all that remains is what we call here in PR agencies the call to action, which is who's next? My challenge to everybody is have a look in skips, bins, around the back of the shed. No matter how wrecked the bike is that you may see, don't chuck it into a landfill. Have a think about how you can turn it into money for a charity. And I'm really excited to hear your suggestions for the next one.